Hello, it's Michael Angelo Caruso. We're going to talk for a few minutes about relationships and how to get more from your relationships. And a little precursor before we begin, we live in a kind of a gimme world where we expect everybody to give us stuff. I don't have to do a whole lot for you, but you have to do a lot for me. I'm entitled to you doing things for me. And the truth is, if that you want people to do nice things for you, it's good for you to set the tone by doing nice things for them. So the best way to actually get is to give. I think you probably know that, but it bears mentioning at the start of this conversation about getting more from relationships. When you give more to the people in your life, you'll find that they are certainly willing to give more back to you. My talking points for today will come from my book, Work Hacks, just released not too long ago. It's 300 cool ideas to speed career success. And there's a section in here on how to read people, because one of the things that you need to know about getting more from relationships is that you have to communicate better. You have to understand how communication works. You have to slow things down in order to get more from the communication. And then everything improves. So I think it helps to talk about ways that we can communicate better. And then what happens is that because you're taking in better information, you can provide better verbals and nonverbals to the other person, and it seems like the relationship is better. So what we're really improving is communication when we talk about improving relationships. So there are 5 talking points in here. If you'd like to write them down, we can do that. And then you won't have trouble remembering them if you write them down. This idea about reading people is fascinating to me because as a lifetime commissioned salesperson, I've had to get good at reading people in order to put food on the table in the early days. And even now, when I'm working as a consultant, for example, I'm often working via a webinar or on some sort of electronic communication. And we all know that interpersonal communication is the best way to communicate, the best way to nurture a relationship. If you have something really important to talk to somebody about, you want to meet with them, right? And the next best thing might be video, because you can at least see the person's face while you're talking. And perhaps below that would be a phone call, because now you're getting tone of voice. If not visual, you're getting the tone of voice. And then email, which is even less nutritious from a communication point of view. And then texting. And what's interesting about our society today is that we're doing less and less of the nutritious forms of communication in favor of the easy, cheesy, low forms of communication like texting. And it's causing a problem. It's causing problems in relationships. It's causing relationships to rupture that otherwise might have been in good standing. And so I have some tips I think that will help you, and we'll get them going right now. So the first tip, when you're trying to improve relationships and read people better, is to try to observe people in different settings. I can tell you that recently I finished up a 10-month engagement doing some sales consulting for a large bank. I don't need to tell you the name of the bank, but it was the name of it was a state and then the word state bank. So it was like Illinois State Bank, but it was an Illinois State Bank. So this was a pretty big deal. I did visit the site on occasion and got a chance to sit down and have face-to-face communication with many members of the team, people I would be communicating with during the 10 months. But most of my communication with this company and with the client was through webinars on the Zoom platform. Now, if you haven't used Zoom, what it does is it puts up a bunch of images on the screen like the Brady Bunch. Remember the old tic-tac-toe board? And you could look at the various images while you're talking to them. And if you've ever worked with me before, you know that I like to engage people, so I don't do the talking head thing. I certainly have some information I want to share, but I'm constantly pinging, that's an IT term now, P-I-N-G-I-N-G. I'm pinging the different people in the call. What do you think? Sometimes addressing them by name. Laura, does this resonate with you? Tim, it seemed like you had a problem with what I just said. Are you okay? And I give them a chance to fix it, right? And sometimes I'm right. Tim did have a problem. Sometimes I'm wrong. No, I'm good, Tim says. And so I always check. And what happens is that people would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. So if I said to Tim, it seems like you have a problem with this, are you okay? Tim would say, yeah, okay, I'm okay, because he didn't want to take care of it in that scenario, right? He didn't want to be, it was too public for him to bring it up. And besides, maybe he wanted to tell me what I wanted to hear. To complicate matters further in this relationship, and I'm human, right? I'm a victim or an accomplice, depending on how you want to frame it, in lots of situations where I could have done better. And so I'll think Tim is okay because of something called confirmation bias. Of course Tim's okay. I'm a fantastic communicator. I've been making my living from this for 20 years, right? I said it perfectly clear. Confirmation bias convinces me that I'm better than I really am. It convinces me that I'm right, even though I may not be. So I would check with Tim during the call, is everything okay? Tim would fib to me. I would fib to myself. And then a few weeks later, I'd get a call from the lady that's looking after me at the state bank, and she would say, Tim's having issues. And I said, what? How can that be? I just asked him on a recent call if everything was okay, and he said yes. She says, I don't know, but we have to address it. Something you said hit him sideways, or he's wrestling with a certain issue, and we need to go back and fix it. And I say, okay, great, tell me more, and let's go back and get it. My point is that I thought I was reading Tim correctly, but I had him completely wrong. And this is what happens when we're in a hurry and we suffer from confirmation bias, and the other person fibs to us, right? These types of things happen. They're human, and you have to be ready for them, and there are ways that you can deal with them. And one of the ways to deal with it is the first example today, which is to observe people in different settings. So what I might do is call Tim offline on the telephone and say, listen, let's talk about this. Or I might give Tim some extra time when I go to visit in person, right? Take him out of the public specter and address him one-to-one and see if I can get a different reading on him. So that's the first tip. Second tip is to believe what people do over what they say, right? So when people volunteer for something, they may have their heart's in the right place, and they might even believe they're going to do it, but then they don't follow through, right? And if this happens 2 or 3 times, you start to understand that this person fibs and overcommits sometimes. And that's, again, a very human thing. I do it myself. Try not to, but we all over-volunteer sometimes. And so the rule of thumb is that you always believe what someone does over what someone says, right? Because we lie with our mouth. Everybody lies. Fibs, whatever you want to call it. But it's harder to lie with our nonverbal cues, with what we do, right? And this is why poker players who want to avoid giving the competition what are called tells. A tell is a physical manifestation of what you're thinking, right? And poker players, professional poker players that make a lot of money playing cards, they will use tricks and disguises so that you can't see what's going on in their eyes, right? It's not illegal for them to wear sunglasses during the game. I kind of wish it was, because I think it would be more interesting television to watch them and their eyes. But you watch all the champions, all the big players, they'll cover their eyes because they can't trust themselves not to fib with their own body language. And so when you know this and you give equal credence, maybe even more weight to the nonverbal cues, you'll find that you're actually getting a better read on people, and you'll be more understanding of the relationship. You'll understand what's really happening, right? But if you're working quickly and somebody says, hey, I'll see you on Monday, and they go, and I'll see your completed project on Monday, and they go, yeah, you sure will, see you later, right? But it all happens so quickly that you miss some signals. If you had looked them in the eye, you would have seen, well, I'm not going to be ready on Monday. And then you have a chance to have the conversation, right? So that's the second tip, is to believe what people do over what they say. Tip number 3 from the Work Hacks book is that sustained eye contact can help the relationship. So sustained eye contact is defined by hanging in there a little bit longer than you otherwise might, right? 1002, 1003, right? 1001, 1002, 1003. And even in this video, while it's tempting to look at my own image, or on a video call where it's tempting to look at your image, I don't do either. I'm looking at the lens of the camera, right? Because if I look at the lens of the camera, I'm looking into your eyes. And you should do the same thing when you're on webinar calls, because it'll mean more to the other person, it means more to the relationship. And of course, the same is true in interpersonal communication, such as one-on-one meetings. The fourth tip is that some nonverbal cues are not easily read. In other words, we miss stuff. And I tell the story about how I had a consulting gig for a financial services company for 4 years. I don't know how I ended up working with so many financial services companies, but I spent a lot of time now with banks and credit unions and financial planners. And this particular company sold something called active investing, third-party money management. They were essentially selling something called an algorithm. And that's fascinating because nobody really knows what an algorithm is, very few people. This is higher math. So let's review. The salesperson didn't know what an algorithm was. The person paying for the product didn't know what an algorithm was. And they're all trying to be adults about this. Now, by the way, I believe in active investing. The algorithms work, right? Just because you don't understand how they work doesn't mean active investing doesn't work. And so I would go on sales calls with my client. My client's the salesperson because we're helping them build their books of business. And I'm sitting next to my client, the salesperson, as he talks to his potential client and tries to sell him active investing services, right? And so everybody's writing, taking notes, and I'm taking notes on what my client's prospect does and says as a result of what my guy is saying. So I'm taking notes that I can review with my client later in the car. What do you think happened? How did it go? This kind of a thing. And so it's not uncommon for me to get in the car with my client and I'll say, well, how do you think it went? And he said, well, I don't think it could have gone better. I think it's very good. I think he's about to become a client of mine. And there you go. And I said, well, it's interesting you should say that because he crossed his arms about 7 minutes into the program and he didn't uncross them for another 10 minutes. And my guy looks at me like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, first of all, I didn't see him do that, right? He's watching the same thing I am, but he didn't see it. Why? He's busy. He's distracted. He's got confirmation bias. Of course, his presentation is mesmerizing. Why would the guy ever, show a lack of interest? Which, by the way, this is behavioral psychologists say this is a lack of interest on occasion. And so I teach my client to drill down in that moment, not to say to the other guy, hey, you crossed your arms, but to take note of it and then say, now, how does this resonate with you, Mr. Prospect? And if the guy denies that, he says it resonates great with me. Well, I don't know. I just want to make sure you're okay with it. It seems like you might have been a little iffy. And then finally the guy says, well, I was wondering about this, right? And of course, he told you that a few seconds ago or a few minutes ago when he crossed his arms. And if you're paying attention, you can call him out on that. This is like one of many tells, including, they all have names, right? I teach this in my programs. This is called attitude. Hands on the hips is called Superman. This is called the thinker pose. This is good, right? Your goal is to get people to do this as often as you can. And then, of course, sustained eye contact is another one of those tells. So the first cool idea is observe people in different settings. The second is believe what people do over what they say. The third is to practice something called sustained eye contact so that you are actually getting that connection, right? I care about you. And because I care about you, you'll care about me. That's the law of reciprocity. And then number 4 is that some nonverbal cues are not easily read. So you'll miss them completely. And that's why it's a good idea to have somebody looking over your shoulder. Spouses and partners do this all the time. And you'll hear funny stories at cocktail parties about how the guy was completely blind to what was happening, but the woman in the relationship, or one or the other, doesn't matter, saw exactly what was happening, right? And then they tell that funny story about how one was clueless and the other one was clued in. And I do the same thing when I'm coaching. I'll watch out for my client, make sure he's not missing anything, and act as an advocate. And you'd be surprised at what people miss in life because they're busy or because they are distracted in some way. The 5th work hack for improving relationships involves asking one more question. Some people call it a clarifying question. Some people call it the paraphrase. But when you can get the other person to repeat back what you said, and this is good, like if you're asking directions, and somebody gives you a bunch of directions, and you say, well, okay, thank you very much. Now let me repeat it back to you. And it works the other way too. You're giving directions. Okay, I just want to make sure you're not confused. Repeat that back to me, because it clears up what's happening, right? It's called a repeat. The other person repeats back. Industries that take communication extremely seriously, like a matter of life or death, like the nuclear industry, has something called a three-peat, right? And the three-peat works like this. I'm taking us to DEFCON 3. Do you copy? The other person repeats back, yes, I copy, DEFCON 3, right? And then the first guy goes, I get it, that you get it. And that's the three-peat. I understand that you understand that we're going to DEFCON 3. Pretty cool. And you are that careful about communication, full of care, when lives are at stake. Unfortunately, in our fast-paced world today, we're not careful about communication. We're not careful about relationships. And then relationships rupture, and we scratch our heads and say, what happened? I thought he was so cool. And the other guy's saying the same thing. I thought you were so cool. And then you don't talk to each other for 6 months or a year, right? And so these hacks for reading people are very useful. And you can get the book, of course, at my website, michaelangelocaruso.com/product, PRODUCT, singular, /work-hacks, plural. michaelangelocaruso.com/product/work-hacks. Very good. Thanks for listening. And feel free to leave a comment down below if this content works for you, or if you have a relationship tip to share with us. I appreciate you. Thanks very much.